Disney's Pocahontas, The Hidden Village. Pocahontas stared at the setting sun. Flit, her hummingbird companion, flew above her. "Come along," her father, Powhatan, called. "Time grows short." Pocahontas turned to her father. "Isn't the sunset beautiful?" she asked. "Yes, it is," he said, "but we can't stop for every wonder you see. We must reach Chief Micmac's village before nightfall." Pocahontas's father was the leader of over 200 villages near the Chesapeake Bay. There were 30 tribes in all, more than 10,000 people. This was a time before the English settlers had come to the land. Pocahontas, Powhatan, and his party of men were making their annual visit to the other villages. Pocahontas loved this time of year, the time of tribute, when each village offered gifts of food, clothing, and other valuables to their leader. Powhatan then shared these gifts with those in need. Pocahontas joined her father and the others. Flit followed. Coquim, the chief's bravest warrior, walked next to Pocahontas. "Why do you come on these visits?" he asked. "I enjoy them," she answered. "There's a celebration in each village with food and dancing and—" "The ceremony of tribute is a very serious matter," Coquim said. He was a stern young man, strong and tall. Pocahontas smiled. "To you, everything is serious," she said. "We could be attacked by our enemies." "Or squirrels and angry raccoons," Pocahontas said, teasing. She thought about Minka, her mischievous pet raccoon. He had been off on his own adventure when she had left home. Coquim puffed out his chest. "It is a female's place to stay in the—" Pocahontas glared at Coquim, then turned and ran ahead of the party. Flit buzzed overhead. Coquim started after her, but Powhatan stopped him. "It appears you've angered my daughter." "I didn't mean to," Coquim said. "Sometimes I don't understand her." "I've often felt the same way," Powhatan smiled. "She's like her mother, filled with a great love of all life, one with the spirits of nature. Do you think she'll ever change?" Powhatan watched his daughter moving through the woods ahead of them. "Maybe," he said. Pocahontas scrambled up a tree like a playful squirrel. "Then again, maybe not." Pocahontas found a nest of baby birds. The hatchlings chirped and screeched. "Feel like staying to take care of them, Flit?" Flit looked as if Pocahontas had suggested he eat fried worms. He flew off into the woods. Pocahontas made a playful chirping sound, then dropped down to the ground. Suddenly she froze. The wind still gently rustled the branches. The baby birds still chirped high above her. But she felt as if strange eyes were watching her. Someone or something was close by. Pocahontas stared into the woods, listening to the forest sounds. But all she could hear was the soft treading of Powhatan moccasins on the carpet of pine needles. Still, she felt invisible eyes upon her. "The village is just beyond that rise," her father said when he reached her side. "We'll be there soon." "Good," Pocahontas replied. "Is something wrong?" he asked. Pocahontas gave her father a warm smile. "No, nothing," she said. "I'm just anxious to reach the village." No one else seemed to feel uneasy, so she decided not to mention the eyes. Whatever was out there would have to wait. Chief Micmac's village had a small river on one side and a forest on the other. There were many houses shaped like turtle shells. The largest house belonged to the chief. It sat in the middle of the village. The villagers cheered and ran to meet Powhatan and his party. Micmac walked up to Powhatan, followed by his bravest warriors and the village medicine man. "Wingapo," Micmac said. He held his hand up with the palm facing Powhatan and Pocahontas. He moved his hand in a wide circle as a sign of greeting. "Welcome to our village." Powhatan and Pocahontas returned the greeting. "It's good to see you again, Micmac. I look forward to celebrating with you and your people," Powhatan said. Micmac smiled. "I'm also looking forward to fishing in your river," Powhatan added. "I spent many happy hours there as a boy." "The celebration will be tomorrow at high sun," Micmac said. We have many tributes to offer, and the people are—" A scream cut off Micmac's speech. Everyone turned towards the woods. 3 young warriors ran out from the woods. "We were attacked!" cried a tall, thin warrior. He held a spear high above his head. "We were attacked by the invisible ones!" The young men ran up to Micmac. "We fought them! We beat them!" they cried. Pocahontas glanced at the crowd. The villagers were whispering to one another. Some were holding their children close. "Pocamoki, you dishonor our guests," Micmac said sternly. Pocamoki apologized to Powhatan and his party. "I'm sorry we startled you, but we've done battle with the invisible ones, and we defeated them." Pocahontas asked, "Who are the invisible ones?" "They're evil," Pocamoki replied. "They can become unseen." Pocahontas studied the young men. Except for a few scratches and some dirt, they didn't look as if they had been in a fight with anyone. Micmac turned to Powhatan. "Some of my people claim the invisible ones have destroyed their weapons and stolen corn from our fields, but no one has seen them." "Then how do you know they exist?" Pocahontas asked. "We have proof," said Pocamoki. "Show them, Uxie." Uxie held up a string of pink and purple seashells. The villagers gasped. "This wampum," Uxie said, "was not made in our village. We seized it from the throats of our attackers," Pocamoki interrupted. "We could buy many things with this wampum, but—" Pocamoki took the shells from Uxie and gave them to Micmac. "We give them to our chief, so that he may give them as tribute to the great chief of our people." The villagers cheered, but Pocahontas looked unconvinced. Her father noticed. "There are many tales among our people," he told her. "One of them speaks of a tribe that trapped a trickster spirit. To gain his freedom, the trickster promised to grant them one wish. The tribe asked for the power to become invisible, so they would be strong in battle." "And the trickster spirit granted their wish?" Pocahontas asked. Her father nodded. "But if that's true, how did Pocamoki defeat them?" Pocamoki frowned. "Alpes, Uxie, and I were hunting in the marsh." Pocahontas noticed that Pocamoki was speaking so the whole village could hear. "Suddenly we heard strange noises," Pocamoki continued. "Though we looked about, we could see no one, only the tall grasses, moving as if someone were pushing them aside. We were surrounded," Alpes said. "I raised my spear." "I'm telling this story," Pocamoki snapped. Alpes looked embarrassed. "We fought the demons by striking where we saw the grass move," Pocamoki said. "Many times I felt their icy grip on my throat, but I was too strong for them." "So were your friends," Pocahontas said. She had decided Pocamoki was a braggart, and she didn't like braggarts. "We fought fiercely until they ran back the way they had come," Pocamoki went on. "Then we returned to our village to share our honor." Pocamoki, Alpes, and Uxie stood proudly before Micmac. "You've indeed brought honor to our village," said Micmac, "and you've done this in the presence of our great chief. We will have much to celebrate tomorrow." After a few words to the villagers, Micmac led Pocahontas and her father to the houses where they would sleep. The villagers took care of the others. Pocahontas glanced at her father. "What's wrong?" she whispered as they walked. "The legend of the invisible ones is a tale of evil and fear," Powhatan whispered back. "If these young warriors fought them, the evil may return to this village tenfold." Pocahontas raised an eyebrow. "If?" she asked. "You don't believe Pocamoki and his friends?" "I don't know." Powhatan stopped in front of Micmac's house. It was as tall as 2 people, with room enough for 10 to sleep comfortably. Powhatan glanced at the river and the woods. "This was once a happy place for me," he said. "I wouldn't like to think that darkness will fall upon it now." He turned and walked into the house. Pocahontas was led to a small but comfortable house nearby. It was made of bent branches and covered with birch bark. A small fire burned in the center of the floor. The smell of fish, squash, and corn cooking on the fire was a welcome one. Several women took care of her needs. She was, after all, the daughter of the great chief. They talked with her and showed her every courtesy, but Pocahontas wondered what the men were talking about in the great house. After supper, Pocahontas gazed out of the doorway. Smoke rose from the roof of every house, which added a warm feeling to the chilly night. Several of her father's warriors were standing with the village guards. "They must believe Pocamoke's story," she said to herself. She went to her bed and slipped under a blanket of beaver fur. She wasn't sure what she believed. She remembered feeling invisible eyes watching her in the woods. There must be magic in the world. Grandmother Willow was a great friend. Her existence proved there was magic. But could men become invisible? The question nagged at Pocahontas as sleep drifted over her. Later, a sound woke Pocahontas. The others were still asleep. Embers crackled and popped in the small fire. An owl hooted to the moon. But these were not the sounds that disturbed her. She rose and slipped out of the hut. All seemed still and calm. Then she noticed 3 figures slipping past Micmac's house and into the forest. Pocahontas wondered if she should wake her father and the others. She could hear what Cocoan would say. "A good thing you came to get a warrior." She shook her head. Surely it was strange for the men to leave the village, but it probably wasn't worth waking everyone up for. Pocahontas slipped past the guards. The trees closed in around her as she moved farther from the village. Night sounds grew louder. Overhead, the branches blocked out the moonlight. What was she doing here? She was about to turn back when she heard voices ahead of her. Pocahontas took a deep breath and moved forward. The smell of damp was heavy in the air. "I must be near the marsh," she said to herself. "Maybe I should—" The ground disappeared from beneath her. Pocahontas landed in cold, wet mud and sank up to her waist. The thick mud was pulling her down into its bottomless ooze. It was quicksand. "Help!" Pocahontas cried out. She reached out into the darkness, feeling for a root or a branch. "Help!" The quicksand was up to her chest now. Who could possibly find her in this darkness? A rope fell onto her face. She grabbed it and held on as tightly as she could. A pair of powerful hands pulled her up and onto dry land. When Pocahontas looked up, all she could see was a squat, shadowy figure. "Thank you," she cried. "I couldn't have lasted much longer." A thin sliver of moonlight cut through the trees. Pocahontas was looking up at 2 gleaming eyes and could see a bit of skin, smooth as a polished stone. The figure coiled the rope and vanished into the brush. "Wait!" Pocahontas called, but her rescuer was gone. Pocahontas washed off the mud and made her way back to Micmac's village. She took off her wet clothes and laid them near the fire to dry. Soon she was tucked into the cozy bed. But as she dozed off, she couldn't stop thinking about the strange figure with glowing eyes. She woke up early the next morning. Everywhere she looked, people were preparing meals and decorating the houses. Many of the children had painted symbols and designs on their skin and clothing. The whole village was busy getting ready for the celebration. Pocahontas spied Pocamoke, Alpies, and Uxie sitting by a house. Several of the villagers were bringing them food and weapons. "Receiving tribute of your own?" she asked. "Why not?" asked Uxie. "We're great warriors." "Where did you say you had your great battle?" she asked. "This side of the marsh, where the grass is tallest," Pocamoke replied. He was admiring a fishing spear tipped with the tail from a horseshoe crab. "Why?" Pocahontas smiled. "When I tell this tale in my village, I want to be sure to tell it right." As she strolled away, Pocahontas couldn't forget the night before. Had those 3 figures been Pocamoke and his friends? Who had saved her life? The vision of the glowing eyes flashed through her mind. Had she met one of the invisible ones? Pocahontas went looking for her father. One of the men told her he had gone north to fish. With Flit above her, Pocahontas ran along the river's edge until she found her father standing in the water with his fishing spear. Cocoan was on guard. Several warriors were with him. Powhatan smiled at Pocahontas. "Did you sleep well?" Pocahontas waded into the river and kissed him on the cheek. "How's the fishing?" "Not as I remember it," he replied. but then few things are. Pocahontas watched the sunlight sparkling on the water. The points of light made her think of the wampum Pocamoke had won in battle. "Did the council decide to hunt the invisible ones?" she asked. Powhatan took aim and threw his spear into the water. "Council matters are not for your ears, daughter." "Missed," he said. Coquelin fetched the spear. Pocahontas let out a deep sigh. She took her father's arm and leaned her head against him. "I only want to know if we're in danger." "From winter frost," her father replied. "From the creeping touch of age, but from evil spirits I can't say." Powhatan took the spear from Coquelin. "The celebration will begin soon, so let's go back to the village and think of happier times." Coquelin and the other men fell in behind them. Flit flew above them as Powhatan told Pocahontas about his boyhood in these woods. He spoke of hunting with his brothers, and of how he had met and fallen in love with Pocahontas' mother. Pocahontas liked hearing her father's stories, but she was listening with only one ear. Her mind was on what had happened the night before. She had decided that after the celebration ended, she was going back into the woods to search the marsh. She felt sure the invisible ones were human, and not invisible. The truth was out there, and she was going to find it. When the sun reached its highest point in the sky, everyone in the village was lined up before the big house. Powhatan and Micmac were both dressed in their finest clothes. Sitting with them were their medicine men and other counselors. Pocahontas stood near her father. The villagers came forth one by one and placed their gifts before him. There were stacks of fine skins, some decorated with shells and shining bits of copper. Many well-crafted spears, clubs, and bows were piled before the great chief. Baskets were filled with beads, pearls, and colorful shells. There were bushels of corn, beans, squash, live crabs, and many other kinds of foods. Drummers played a lively beat on logs. Villagers were dressed in colorful clothing and feathered headdresses. They danced and sang a song of praise and thanks. The smell of delicious foods filled the air. For a time, Pocahontas enjoyed herself. But late in the afternoon, as her father sat in council, she decided the time had come to act. "Come on, Flit," she whispered. "Let's search the marsh." Flit buzzed his wings. He flew backward and forward in Pocahontas' path, so she could not move ahead. "You know me by now," she told Flit. "Either come with me or let me by." Flit let her pass, then flew after her. Pocahontas moved swiftly through the forest, with Flit close behind her. When she reached the marsh, she stopped. "This is where Pocamoke said they fought," she told Flit. Pocahontas searched the damp earth and tall grass for signs of a struggle. Almost everywhere she stepped, her feet began to sink in mud. "That's strange," she told Flit. "How did Pocamoke and the others fight here? The ground is too wet, and they would have been covered in mud." Flit flew down for a closer look. Maybe it was on the other side. Pocahontas made her way to the other side of the bog. She reached the spot where she had been dragged out of the quicksand. The grass was bent, and there were strange marks on the ground. "They're not like any footprints I've ever seen," she told Flit. The marks disappeared a few feet from where she stood. "Now what?" Pocahontas asked Flit. She was still looking at the marks when she heard noises moving toward them. Flit pulled her hair, then flew to the top of a tree. Pocahontas scaled the tree and hid among its branches just as three figures stopped below her. "We need more proof to show the invisible ones exist," Pocamoke was talking to his friends. "Chief Powhatan doubts our story." "But how will we get that proof?" Alpies asked. "We'll think of something," said Uxie. "Once we convince everyone that the invisible ones exist, we will be the most honored warriors among our people." Pocahontas did not like what she was hearing. "Let's follow them," she told Flit when the warriors had gone. "I'm sure whatever they're planning will end in no good." Flit buzzed in agreement. Pocahontas was about to climb down the tree when she heard another noise. She leaned back into the leaves and waited. A man stepped out of the bushes near where Pocamoke had been standing. He was short and his body was thick. He was covered in branches and painted with dyes. He seemed to melt into the leaves and bushes as he passed them. He headed off in a different direction from Pocamoki and the others. Pocahontas dropped to the ground. "Follow him from the air," she told Flit. "I'll follow you at a safe distance." Flit eagerly took to the sky, on the trail of the strange man. He led Pocahontas and Flit deeper into the forest. They lost sight of the man, and Flit soared overhead. When Pocahontas finally caught up with Flit, he was circling a birch tree on the outskirts of a sunken glade. Pocahontas could make out small huts sheltered under leafy branches. Flit flew to Pocahontas's shoulder. "It looks deserted," she said. "Are you sure this is where he went?" Flit scowled at Pocahontas. All right, she said. "I didn't mean to insult you." Cautiously she eased herself down the hill and moved among the huts. In one she found berries, dried fish, and other foods. In another she found herbs and totems. The third hut was filled with clothing, weapons, and paints. It was also filled with beautiful shells. "Those shells look like the ones Pocamoki had," she exclaimed. "This must be where the invisible ones live. I have to tell Father." Pocahontas crawled out of the hut and froze. Standing around her was a group of people covered with branches. "We cannot let you leave," one said. They began to close in. Flit darted back and forth. Pocahontas was trapped. "We've never had a prisoner before," said the squat man painted with dyes. Pocahontas sat with 4 men and 4 women and their children in the glade. Above them was a large net made of vines and branches, covered with more branches and leaves. It was a marvelous hiding place. "Why keep me prisoner at all?" Pocahontas asked. Flit sat on her shoulder, cautiously watching the strangely painted humans. "I mean you no harm." "How can we believe you?" asked one of the women. "You're one of the villagers who hunt us." "I'm not from Chief Micmac's village. I'm Pocahontas, daughter of Chief Powhatan." The people feverishly whispered among themselves. They looked worried. "We didn't know," said the first man. "I am Nemat. These are my brothers Patow, Peru, and Wook." "And these are our wives and children," Peru said. He was taller than Nemat and much thinner. "We're sorry we can't make the daughter of a great chief more comfortable, but we're in hiding, fugitives from an unjust ruler who—" "Peru will bore you with our tale," said Patow. He was the oldest brother. Already there were streaks of gray in his hair. "Perhaps Pocahontas would like something to eat," said Coochow, the wife of Nemat. She offered Pocahontas a cup of water and a bowl of wild blueberries. Both the cup and bowl were made of baked clay. "These are delicious," Pocahontas said, nibbling on the berries. "And I would like to hear your story. Are you really the invisible ones?" Nemat laughed softly. "We're not evil spirits, but we did take our disguise from the legends." 2 winters passed. We lived near the top of the great river, Peru explained, where it turns and follows the setting sun. "You must be Minka!" Pocahontas looked worried. "Our people sometimes fight each other," said Patow. "That's true." Flit tugged nervously at Pocahontas's hair. She gently stroked his back with her finger to calm him down. Nemat sighed. "In our village, the chief was always looking for someone to fight. If he couldn't find a reason, he would cause trouble between our people and our neighbors. We couldn't bear it any longer," Peru said, "so we set out on our own. Then the chief sent warriors to bring us back. They hunted us like animals, on and on, never giving us—" "I believe Pocahontas understands." Patow shook his head. Nemat frowned. "In my village, I was called a coward because I didn't want to fight all the time." "None of us wanted to make war," said Patow, "and certainly not on people who weren't attacking us. So we had to leave our woods and come downriver. Hunted by our own people, and some of yours, we adopted these disguises," added Nemat. "If you don't believe in fighting senseless wars," Pocahontas asked, "why did you attack Pocamoki and the others?" "We have attacked no one," Nemat said. "But—" Suddenly Pocahontas began to wonder again about the 3 braggarts from Micmac's village. "Have you ever met a warrior named Pocamoki?" Pocahontas described him. The children began to laugh. "They've seen him," said Peru. He and 2 others have been hunting us for some time, but they're poor trackers. The children have had fun leading them on false trails. Did one of you lose a wampum necklace? Pocahontas asked. I did, said one of the girls. It was my father's. We were playing. I shouldn't have been wearing it. Were you teasing Pocamoki that day? Yes, the girl answered. Now I see, said Pocahontas. They were lying. She told Namat and the others how Pocamoki had bragged about the battle. Why would he do such a thing? Peru asked. It will only make the villagers more determined to hunt us down. Pocahontas set her bowl on the ground. I don't know why they did this, but I'll tell my father the moment I return. Can we really let her go? Peru asked nervously. We can't keep her forever. Namat smiled. I think if we can't trust Chief Powhatan's daughter, we can trust no one. He turned to Pocahontas. I'll lead you back to the village. But remember, Micmac's people mustn't learn of this place until we've decided what to do. Pocahontas agreed. She followed Namat back to Chief Micmac's village. Will you be safe on the way back? Pocahontas asked. Of course, Namat replied. We do this all the time. I'll speak to my father, she told Namat. He'll make sure that the truth comes out. Namat thanked her, then blended into the forest, disappearing before her eyes. Pocahontas ran into the village with Flit buzzing overhead. She raced to Micmac's lodge, but Powhatan wasn't there. Where are my father and Chief Micmac? Pocahontas asked one of the villagers. They're out looking for you, she said. When you vanished from the village, Pocamoki said you'd been kidnapped by the Invisible Ones. Your father was furious. But I wasn't taken by anyone. That may be, said the woman, but the warriors are out there now, determined to find the Invisible Ones and destroy them all. Your father has taken his warriors, and Micmac has taken his. Pocahontas ran as fast as she could. Perhaps Namat and his family could hide their tracks, but she hadn't hidden hers. If Coquelin was leading the search party, he'd find her footprints and follow them to the huts in the glade. Namat and his people wouldn't stand a chance. Pocahontas ran with all the speed she could find within her. Flit soared high overhead. He spotted a search party and dived down to Pocahontas. He buzzed his wings in front of her. Lead the way, Pocahontas said without breaking stride. Pocahontas ran on through the woods. Once or twice she stumbled, but she kept on going. She found her father at the birch tree overlooking the glade. He had signaled the warriors to surround the camp. I knew Coquelin would find it, she said to herself. The men raised their bows and arrows, spears and clubs. They were ready to attack. Stop! Pocahontas screamed. I'm all right! As she ran to her father, she could see the look of relief on his face. She knew he would not show his feelings while his men were watching, so she threw her arms around him. I'm glad to see you're well, Powhatan said. Where have you been? His tone was stern. No one was able to find you. I thought you'd been kidnapped. Pocahontas looked into the glade. Namat and his people were standing in the open. They wouldn't believe we hadn't harmed you, he said. I know, Pocahontas said. I came as fast as I could. Powhatan's forehead wrinkled with annoyance. Would you please tell me what this is about? It's a long story, Pocahontas began. Flit flew down and landed on Patau's shoulder. The most important thing to know is, they're not evil, they're not our enemy. Pocahontas told her father how she'd been rescued the night she fell into the bog, how she'd searched the marches and followed Namat the next day, what the Minka had said when she'd found them. When Pocahontas was finished, Powhatan sat down with Namat and his people and listened to their story. When he had heard the entire tale, he shook his head. I have always thought the Minka leader was unreasonable. Now I'm certain of it. He rose. If you wish, you may live among my people. Patau shook his head. I'm not sure we would be welcome after all that has happened. My father rules many villages, Pocahontas said with pride. I'm sure you'll find one you can call home. Coquelin stared at Namat. What about Pocamoki, Uxie, and Alpes? He asked. They swore you attacked them in the marshes. They lied, Pocahontas declared. No one can fight there. The mud almost dragged me down. Pocamoki and the other two are warriors, Kocoum said. They're strong and wouldn't have been pulled under. They would have been covered with mud, she said, at least their leggings and legs, but they were clean when they ran out of the woods. Your point is well made, daughter, said Powhatan. I, too, remember how clean they were. They will have to face me when we return to the village. Pocahontas grinned. There was a twinkle in her eye. Father, she stretched the word out. I think Pocamoki and his friends deserve a lesson. Powhatan raised an eyebrow. He had seen this look on his daughter's face before. It always spelled trouble for someone. What type of lesson did you have in mind? One that can only be taught at night. She turned to Namat, and by the invisible ones. Her father sighed. This isn't our way, Kocoum said. But it is her way, said her father. Let us hear your plan, daughter. Pocahontas smiled. From her hiding place in the forest, Pocahontas watched Pocamoki and his friends leaving the village. This is a great honor, Alpes said. We are the official village protectors. Some honor, Pocamoki grumbled. Chief Micmac said we have to stay out here until we catch the invisible ones. How are we going to do that? Asked Uxie. We only pretended we fought the invisible ones. Then who lost the wampum we found? I don't know. Maybe the Minka, maybe some other people, said Uxie. Pocamoki nodded. But Micmac doesn't want us to bring him Minka. He wants the invisible ones, and I don't know where they are. You mean there are invisible ones? Uxie asked. Pocamoki shrugged. Perhaps. The legend says. The bushes began to shake. An eerie howl floated through the night air. What was that? Alpes cried. The howl rose again and echoed. It's the wind. Pocamoki clutched his spear while Uxie spun around, looking in all directions at once. Pocahontas smothered a laugh. Maybe we should... The words caught in Pocamoki's throat. Bushes rose and broke away from the earth. In the moonlight, evil seemed to glow from deep within the forest. It's the evil spirits, Alpes shouted. They've come to take us. Something dived at them like a demon bat. It had long horns and talons. Run! Pocamoki shouted. But Uxie and Alpes were already racing back to the village. Pocamoki ran after them. The moment they were gone, Pocahontas stepped out from the trees. Laughter echoed from the forest, where Namat, his family, and some of Micmac's and Powhatan's warriors were hiding. Pocahontas raised her hand, and the demon bat landed on her finger. Did you enjoy your part in this, Flit? She pulled feathered bands from his head and feet. Flit shook himself till his feathers puffed out proudly. I guess you did. Was it fun, Coquelin? She asked. Coquelin raised an eyebrow. It was a just punishment, he said. We didn't mean to hurt anyone, Pocamoki said. He and his friends stood before the village. Pocahontas, Powhatan, and Micmac sat by a roaring fire, listening to their story. This time there was no praise, no tribute. We did it to gain honor in the tribe, Uxie added. What kind of honor would this bring to you? Micmac asked. We would be seen as great warriors, said Pocamoki. The village would come to depend on us, respect us. Powhatan turned to Kocoum. You are one of my finest warriors, he said. What do you say to these men? What honor can be gained by a lie? Kocoum's eyes narrowed. What respect can a warrior earn if he has no respect for himself? You, Pocamoki, almost cost Namat and his people their lives, Powhatan said. I didn't mean to, Pocamoki said. But they're not our people. It's not as if... The accusing eyes of the villagers burned into Pocamoki. May I speak, father? Pocahontas asked. Powhatan nodded. We are all children of Mother Earth and Father Sky, she told Pocamoki. My father, a great chief in peace and war, taught me that. No one is without worth, not even you. You have much to learn, Pocamoki, Micmac said. Perhaps these lessons would best be taught outside this village. Powhatan frowned. May I suggest they learn their lessons here? Home is the best place for one to learn about life. Micmac nodded. Pokemoki, Alpes, Uxie, your labors will be hard and long. You've much to make up for. You'll start by building homes for Namat and his people. I hope they'll stay with us for a time. They have a great deal to teach us. After a few words to the villagers, Micmac declared the meeting at an end. Everyone was tired, especially Pocahontas and Flit. They were asleep before they knew it. The next morning, Pocahontas stood beside her father. His spear was in his hand. Flit glided lazily on the air currents over the river. Powhatan sighed. I remember catching many big fish in this river, he said. I thought that was the only joy this river gave me, but there were others. Pocahontas looked up at her father. What were they? I remember amazement as I watched the sun rise and set, he replied, and peace as the wind and water moved about me but did not disturb me, and love. Pocahontas was surprised by this last word. She seldom heard her father mention it. You found love here? With your mother, Powhatan replied. We sat here when we were young and planned our future. Did it turn out the way you planned? Not all of it. Powhatan looked fondly at his daughter. But the best was as we had hoped. He threw his spear at a shadow in the water. Got him, he cried.